This is absolutely the scariest movie I have ever seen. Adapted from the horror novel of the same name, it consists of 3 interconnected thriller stories, making it a top-notch suspenseful horror masterpiece. Grab your friends and watch it together. The film begins with a man named Simon, who claims to communicate with the dead. To prove his ability, he even agrees to undergo a public test. He is stripped naked and taken into a laboratory. As the lights go out, an eerie growl echoes throughout the room. When the lights come back on, the walls of the laboratory are covered in fresh red writing, and Simon has passed out on the floor, unable to withstand the overwhelming power of the spirits. Mary, who is responsible for the experiment, has never believed in ghosts, but she knows that it is impossible for one person to write so many words in such a short time. More importantly, the writing on the wall includes the dying words of her own son, which forces Mary to believe that Simon truly can communicate with the dead. In order to contact her son's spirit, Mary invites Simon to her home and even lets him visit her son's bedroom. Mary thinks that this will increase the chances of Simon seeing her son, but unexpectedly, she unwittingly falls into Simon's seductive trap. Just as Mary believes she will be able to communicate with her son's ghost regularly, a drunken Simon confesses that he is a complete fraud. It turns out that Simon had bribed a repairman the day before the experiment. With the repairman's help, Simon sneaked into the laboratory and used a chemical-soaked brush to write invisible text on the walls. He also hid a bottle of chemical liquid there. When the experiment began, Simon sprayed the liquid around, turning the invisible text into red writing. As for the strange noises everyone heard, they were pre-recorded and hidden in the ventilation ducts. Simon knew about Mary's son's final words because he was familiar with Mary's ex-husband, who had shared all kinds of details about Mary, sparking Simon's plan to deceive her for money and sex.
Your son is dead. He's gone. He's 6 feet under.
Furious, Mary slapped Simon hard. She then went back to her son's room, holding his teddy bear and crying silently. Just as she was preparing to accept the harsh truth, a line of words mysteriously appeared on the small blackboard behind her. Bring him here. At the same time, there was an extra figure in bed. Mary walked over, pulled back the covers, and smiled in surprise. The next morning, after Simon sobered up, he realized he had made a big mistake and repeatedly apologized to Mary, saying that he would leave immediately, but it was too late. Mary had already spread the news of his supposed spiritual abilities, and many wealthy people came seeking his services. When Simon heard there was money to be made, he immediately agreed to stay. However, as he left, a boy suddenly appeared on the empty swing, Mary's son's ghost. That night, Mary took Simon to her son's room and, in front of everyone, stripped Simon of his clothes to prove that there was no chance for him to cheat. She then whispered an incomprehensible phrase into Simon's ear.
You know you really pissed them off.
It turns out that Simon's actions of using the spirits to deceive the families of the deceased had already angered the spirits. After everyone left the room, the vengeful spirits appeared beside Simon. His body was suddenly lifted off the ground, and his hair began falling off uncontrollably. The spirits proceeded to carve their stories onto Simon's flesh. When Mary opened the door again, Simon had already become a bloodied mess. From that day on, whenever someone was close to death, their story would be etched onto Simon's skin, earning him the nickname Books of Blood. Soon after, a bookstore owner who was in debt was attacked by debt collectors. In order to escape his pursuers, he told Bennett about the Books of Blood and mentioned that this legendary work was worth millions. The bookstore owner planned to work together with Bennett to steal the Books of Blood. However, Bennett intended to take it all for himself, but after Bennett left the bookstore, the already dead bookstore owner revealed a strange smile. Unaware of this, Bennett, along with his companion, traveled to the city where Mary lived. As they drove, they almost ran into a girl wearing headphones. However, when they arrived near Mary's house, they found that the place had already fallen into ruin. It turned out that the influence of the Books of Blood had transformed what was once a thriving city into a dead town. Coincidentally, their car also broke down at that moment. As Bennett got out to check the car, his companion Steve suddenly saw a ghostly face in the rearview mirror. He quickly turned around but found that the back seat was empty. Then, the ghostly image mysteriously appeared outside the car. Furious, Steve thought someone was playing tricks on him, so he ran after it. Bennett, seeing this, had no choice but to follow his companion. Before long, he saw Steve running in terror into a church, where he immediately shot himself without saying a word. Steve's strange actions terrified Bennett, who rushed to flee the church. But the strange events didn't stop there. The car suddenly started on its own and charged toward him. Bennett had no choice but to run while shooting at the driver's seat. When the car finally crashed to a halt, Bennett realized that the driver's seat was completely empty. Despite all these bizarre happenings, Bennett remained determined that, since he had come this far, he had to get the books of blood before leaving. Soon, Bennett arrived at the only house nearby that was still lit up. This was Mary's house. There, he encountered Mary, as well as Simon, who had been turned into a living book.
You're not the first, and you certainly will not be the last to seek the Book of Blood. See, all their stories are on him too. As yours will be.
No sooner had Mary spoken than Simon's forehead began to show Bennett's name. This made Bennett feel an inexplicable sense of dread. Sure enough, the next moment, a swarm of rats suddenly flooded the room and began attacking Bennett. Terrified, he ran outside. Bennett no longer dared to pursue the books of blood, but Mary clearly wasn't about to let him off that easily. As the rats continued to swarm him, Bennett had no choice but to pull out a knife and stab them one by one. But it turned out that everything was just an illusion. He wasn't stabbing rats, he was stabbing his own body. With his wounds growing heavier, Bennett staggered away. When he finally managed to find a hotel, he saw the owner handling a dead body. Before he could recover from the shock, he was suddenly attacked from behind by the owner's wife, who hammered him into a bloody pulp. The next morning, the little girl who had nearly been hit by Bennett the day before showed up at the hotel to stay. The girl's name was Jenna. She had autism and was extremely sensitive to sounds. Even the sound of chewing while eating was unbearable for her. However, Jenna insisted that she wasn't sick and refused to seek medical treatment. In desperation, her parents sent her to the countryside. After overhearing that her parents planned to abandon her, Jenna decided to kill them with scissors while they were asleep. But in the end, she couldn't bring herself to do it and gave up. Jenna then secretly took 2 bundles of cash from home, packed her backpack, and left with her noise-canceling headphones. After buying a ticket at the station, she noticed an old man in black staring directly at her. At first, Jenna didn't think much of it, but soon after, she saw the old man boarding the same train as her. Realizing that the old man was following her, Jenna hurriedly got off and found a nearby hotel. Coincidentally, the hotel owner, Sam, was the one who had killed Bennett, perhaps because Jenna was still young. Ellie didn't kill her. Later, when Jenna was lying in bed, preparing to rest, she heard strange sounds coming from the wall. Driven by curiosity, she leaned closer to the wall to listen, only to see a cockroach crawl out from inside. Jenna, terrified, turned and ran, almost bumping into Ellie, who had suddenly appeared. When she looked back at the wall, the cockroach had disappeared. Jenna assumed it was just a hallucination. When Jenna learned that Ellie had specifically invited her to dinner, she followed her to the kitchen. It was then that she realized that, besides herself, a boy named Gavin was also staying at the hotel. Gavin immediately took a liking to Jenna and asked for her phone number. After dinner, Jenna thought she could finally sleep peacefully, but suddenly, she heard the sound of someone banging on the door. What terrified her even more was that she found herself unable to move. Before long, she saw Sam and his wife walk in, eyeing her like prey. Sam then took out a ruler and began measuring her body, which confused Jenna even more. The next morning, when Jenna woke up unharmed, she thought it had all been a dream, but when she went to a cafe to buy coffee, she saw the same mysterious old man who had been following her the night before. Terrified, Jenna didn't even take her coffee and just turned and walked away. Sure enough, the old man followed her closely. Jenna could only run back to the hotel, and she stayed inside all day, not daring to leave. That night, she again heard strange sounds coming from the walls. Convinced that it wasn't a hallucination, she leaned against the wall and started feeling around. She discovered several hidden compartments in the wall. Opening a smaller compartment, she found a strange 4-bag. Then, when she opened a larger compartment, she was horrified to find a dried-up corpse inside. She screamed in terror. Hearing her scream, Ellie came to the door and asked what was going on. Jenna quickly lied, claiming it was just a bad dream. At the same time, Gavin, who was staying in the room next door, sent her a message. Jenna immediately told Gavin that the hotel was suspicious and urged him to call the police as soon as possible. What Jenna didn't know was that Gavin's phone was now in Ellie's hands. Completely unaware of this, Jenna continued texting, oblivious to the hand that was creeping up from behind her. Grabbing her shoulder, she jumped in fright. It turned out the woman inside the wall wasn't dead after all. The 4-bag was keeping her alive. Seeing this, Jenna tried to escape by jumping out of the window, but Sam was downstairs, and Ellie was standing in the doorway, ready to rush in. With no other choice, Jenna opened the door and hid behind it, using a lamp base to knock Ellie unconscious. Jenna initially planned to escape immediately, but Sam had already reached the staircase. In a panic, Jenna rushed into the basement and found another hidden compartment to hide in. However, as soon as Jenna crawled inside, she discovered that both sides of the compartment were filled with the living dead. Terrified and furious, Jenna mustered her courage and crawled to the other side. But what terrified her was that Sam and his wife were already waiting for her. They easily subdued her and injected her with a tranquilizer. As Jenna lay motionless, Ellie calmly explained that she and her husband turned their guests into the living dead to help them escape the burdens of life, allowing them to live carefree and without worry. Ellie further revealed that Sam had measured Jenna's body with a ruler the previous night to create a perfectly fitting coffin for her. Now, the walls and floors of the house were filled with the living dead, including Sam's own daughter, and Gavin, too, had been turned into one of the living dead the previous night. Now, it was Jenna's turn. Just as Ellie finished speaking, there was a knock at the door. It was the mysterious old man who had been following Jenna. He claimed to be Jenna's boyfriend Tony's father. After his son had mysteriously committed suicide, he had been trying to find Jenna to learn the truth. What he couldn't have known was that before he even had the chance to meet Jenna, Sam killed him with an axe. While Sam and Ellie were distracted, Jenna struggled to move her body. She managed to crawl to the window and outside, where she secretly climbed into Tony's father's car. However, Sam and Ellie soon arrived with the old man's body. Jenna had no choice but to hide in the backseat and remain silent. Jenna watched as Sam carried the old man's body into the car and drove it to a cliff. He placed a stone on the accelerator, engaged the gear with a wooden stick, and made the car drive off the cliff, creating the illusion that the old man had driven the car off the cliff by himself. Jenna, unfortunately, went off the cliff along with the car. Miraculously, when Jenna woke up, she found herself in a hospital. However, what surprised Jenna was that the police had determined the old man's death to be suspicious, but their theory was that he, unable to bear the grief of losing his son, had intended to kill himself and his son's girlfriend together. Thus, the hotel owners had miraculously escaped justice. When Jenna recovered and returned home, her parents were as indifferent as ever, treating her like a transparent figure in the family, as though she didn't exist. The most unbearable thing for Jenna was that she had finally recalled the true cause of Tony's death. The man who had deeply loved her had, in fact, jumped to his death from her urging.
Close your eyes. Picture me. I'm right there with you. We'll do it at the same time.
Unable to accept this cruel truth, Jenna was tormented by her conscience. Eventually, she could no longer endure the pain and went back to the hotel, begging Ellie to turn her into one of the living dead. The elderly couple was pleased by Jenna's decision and, respecting her wishes, removed her eyes and ears, sealed her mouth, and placed her body beneath the floorboards of their room. And Jenna's story was recorded on Simon's body. As long as Simon was alive, his body would continuously generate new, real stories. And with that, the story ends. Follow me for more exciting content.